range in height from 46 to 82 feet. Their movement is powered by electric motors recessed in the lock walls. They are operated from a control tower, which is located on the wall that separates each pair of locks, and from which the flooding or emptying of the lock chambers is also controlled. The lock chambers are 1,000 feet long, 110 feet wide, and 40 feet deep. Because of the delicate nature of the original lock mechanisms, only small craft are allowed to pass through the locks unassisted. Larger craft are guided by electric towing locomotives, which operate on cog tracks on the lock walls and serve to keep the ships centered in the lock. Before a lock can be entered, a fender chain, stretched between the walls of the approach, must be passed. If all is proceeding properly, that chain will be dropped into its groove at the bottom of the channel. If by any chance the ship is moving too rapidly for safety, the chain will remain stretched and the vessel will run against it. The chain, which is operated by hydraulic machinery in the walls, then will pay out slowly by automatic release until the vessel has been brought to a stop. If the vessel should get away from the towing locomotive and, breaking through the chain, ram the first gate, a second gate 50 feet away will protect the lock and arrest further advance. The third lock systems of the third set of locks project, begun in 2007, were inspired by the Barendrecht lock in Antwerp, Belgium, and water-saving basins used in canals in Germany. Some 190,000 tons of steel, mostly from Mexico, were entrenched in heavily reinforced concrete to build the lock chambers on the Atlantic and Pacific sides, and the new lock gates measure up to 33 feet wide, 98 feet high, and 190 feet long. The new chambers and basins, which control the water flowing from Gatun Lake, were designed to minimize the turbulence of water flow and the disturbance to transiting vessels. The basins were completed in June 2016 and include 158 valves consisting of 20,000 tons of structural material. Officials say those water-saving basins are the largest in the world and facilitate a 60% reuse of water, whereas the existing locks use 52 million gallons with each use. The new locks use 48 million gallons. Unfortunately, the Panama Canal is now in serious danger. Panama Canal in danger. The vestiges of an ancient forest tell the story of just how bad things are at the drought-stricken Panama Canal. A few hundred feet from the massive tankers hauling goods across the globe, gaunt tree stumps rise above the waterline. They're all that remains of a woodland flooded more than a century ago to create the canal. It's not unusual to see them at the height of the dry season, but now, in the immediate aftermath of what's usually the rainy period, they should be fully submerged. With water levels languishing at 6 feet below normal, the Canal Authority capped the number of vessels that can cross. The limits imposed late last year were the strictest since 1989, when the conduit was shut as the U.S. invaded Panama to extract its de facto ruler, Manuel Noriega. Some shippers are paying millions of dollars to jump the growing queue, while others are taking longer, costlier routes around Africa or South America. The constraints have since eased slightly due to a rainier than expected November, but at 24 ships a day, the maximum is still well below the pre-drought daily capacity of about 38. As the dry season takes hold, the bottleneck is poised to worsen again. As a canal, as a country, we need to take some measures because it isn't acceptable, Eric Cordova, the manager of the water division at the Canal Authority, said in an interview. We need to calibrate the system again. The canal's travails reflect how climate change is altering global trade flows. Drought created choke points last year on the Mississippi River and the Rhine in Europe. In the UK, rising sea levels are elevating the risk of flooding along the Thames. Melting ice is creating new shipping routes in the Arctic. Under normal circumstances, the Panama Canal handles about 3% of global maritime trade volumes and 46% of containers moving from Northeast Asia to the U.S. East Coast. The channel is Panama's biggest source of revenue, bringing in $4.3 billion in 2022. To allow for 24 vessels a day through the dry season, the canal will release water from Lake Alajuela, a secondary reservoir. If the rains begin to pick up in May, the canal might be able to start increasing traffic, according to Cordova. But those are short-term fixes. In the long term, the primary solution to chronic water shortages will be to dam up the Indio River and then drill a tunnel through a mountain to pipe fresh water 5 miles into Lake Gatun, the canal's main reservoir. The project, along with additional conservation measures, will cost about $2 billion. Cordoba estimates. He says it will take at least 6 years to dam up and fill the site. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is conducting a feasibility study. The Indio River Reservoir would increase vessel traffic by 11 to 15 a day, enough to keep Panama's top moneymaker working at capacity while guaranteeing fresh water for Panama City, where developers have erected a mini Miami of gleaming skyscrapers over the past 2 decades. The country will need to dam even more rivers to guarantee water through the end of the century. Moving the proposal forward won't be easy. It will need congressional approval, and the thousands of farmers and ranchers whose lands would be flooded for the reservoir are already organizing to oppose it. It's not the first time Panamanians are banding together to push back against a major infrastructure initiative. Last year, protesters regularly blocked roads after the government rushed to keep First Quantum Minerals Luted's $10 billion copper mine operating. Authorities have since said that they will shut the mine, a project many view as an ecological disaster. Elizabeth Delgado lives in the last house along the road to the Indio River. It's one of the first that will get flooded if the reservoir is built. During major storms, the Indio rises enough to get within a few meters of her unpainted wooden home, where her family lives off of the rice.
If you stop driving at night because of vision problems, try this simple ice hack with water before bed and watch your vision go from this to this. I know this sounds weird, but this ice hack could be the solution to blurred vision, glaucoma, retinal detachment, cataracts, diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, and more. Here's why it works. Every human has around 106 million cells in their eyes. These cells collect light signals and send them to the brain, which decodes them in a way that allows us to see. Now, the problem, though, is that your eye's light-collecting cells, they naturally deteriorate with age. But what if they didn't have to? In 2007, scientists from Harvard and Cambridge University discovered a Nobel Prize-winning way to renew these deteriorating eye cells. And now, after years of research, a simple ice hack that can restore the God-given 20/20 vision you were born with. This ice hack was recently featured on NBC, Fox News, and ABC, and because I know there are a lot of people out there dealing with vision problems, I've attached the link from the news report below. This powerful vision-restoring ice hack can help whether your vision has been declining for 2 months, 2 years, or 2 decades. So I'm urging, use the blue button below to watch the presentation and discover why this simple ice hack is changing so many people's lives. Just look what it's done for people like Kathy Smith.
I can see a clearer change in my sight.
Janet Morris.
So far, my vision is improving.
And Justin Goff.
My vision is getting a lot better, and more importantly, so is my ability to enjoy life.
These are just 3 of the people featured in the report, so make sure you watch this video while you still can, because I have no doubt that CEOs in the eye care industry, they're trying to take this presentation down again, because eye care is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but not if you don't have to rely on their expensive products. So I'm urging you, stop everything you're doing and watch this short free presentation now. In the first 3 minutes, you'll discover why this Nobel-backed ritual is so good at improving vision. Use the blue button below and watch the video now before it's taken down again.
Plantains and cassava she grows. She has no intention of moving. How are we supposed to survive someplace else where we won't know what to do? Delgado said. They've told us that we're going to have to leave, but we're going to stick with our land. Another potential fix is decidedly more experimental. In November, a small plane operated by North Dakota-based Weather Modification, Inc. arrived in Panama to test cloud seeding, the process of implanting large salt particles into clouds to boost the condensation that creates rain. But cloud seeding has mostly been deployed successfully in dry climates, not in tropical countries like Panama. Some shippers have expressed frustration that the Canal Authority isn't moving faster to address low water levels. No significant infrastructure projects have gone ahead in Panama to increase the fresh water supply. Jeremy Nixon, Chief Executive Officer of Japanese container transportation company Ocean Network Express Holdings, or ONE, wrote in a letter to Panamanian President Laurentino Cortizo Cohen that was seen by Bloomberg. We sincerely hope that as ONE, and on behalf of our customers, that some urgent action can now be taken. Panama's presidential palace didn't respond to a request for comment on the letter. A combination of climate change and infrastructure expansion are to blame for the canal's woes. The Canal Authority completed a new set of locks in 2016 to increase traffic and keep pace with the growing size of cargo ships. What it didn't do was build a new reservoir to pump in enough fresh water. Then the drought hit. As of November, 2023 was the driest year on record at Barrow, Colorado Island in Lake Gatun, according to Steve Payton, the director of the Physical Monitoring Program at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. Global warming is intensifying the weather phenomenon known as El Niño, which has brought dry conditions to Panama and is expected to last at least through March in the northern hemisphere. Lake Gatun drains faster during severe dry seasons, and rising temperatures accelerate evaporation. Last year was totally different from the others, said Gabriel Aleman, the head of the Panama Canal Pilots Association. He's steered ships through the canal for more than 30 years. We haven't reached the peak of the impact. In 2023, the trade winds never fully kicked in, which contributed to record water temperatures off the Pacific and Atlantic coasts of Panama. Weak winds also mean that rain clouds don't make it all the way to Gatun. On many days, it pours in Panama City, while the lake only gets a few drops. The crisis has set back available shipping routes by more than a century. When it began operating in 1914, the canal provided an alternative to the Suez Canal, the Cape of Good Hope, and the Strait of Magellan to send goods between the northern and southern hemispheres. Shippers are now returning to all three options to avert bottlenecks in Panama, although vessels have recently diverted from the Suez to avoid attacks from Yemen's Houthi rebels. While the Suez is a sea-level canal, the Panama is a freshwater channel reliant on artificial lakes, making it vulnerable to drought. Jorge Luis Quijano, a consultant and former head of the Canal Authority, says it could take a year to get back to normal volumes. Quijano says he saw the problem coming a decade ago, when he supervised the addition of a new set of locks to accommodate larger vessels in the canal. The locks are engineering marvels, but they're also water hogs. Salt water mixes with fresh water when the canal's locks fill up. To prevent the country's biggest source of potable water, Lake Gatun, from getting salty, the canal discharges enough lake water to fill up 76 Olympic-sized pools with each vessel. Giant basins inject some of this water back into the lake, but because this process increases salinity, it can only be used on a limited basis, Quijano said. Before his term ended, he lobbied the government to start construction of an additional reservoir, but to no avail. As officials look for lasting solutions, local residents are feeling the effects of the prolonged drought. Raquel Luna has lived on the edge of Lake Gatun since she was 16. 5 of her 6 adult children live up the road. Most years, she charges visitors $1 a head to park at her shaded patch of lakefront. A row of palm trees is normally used to tie boats, but now they're 20 feet from the water line. Visitors need to scramble across rocks and mud to get to the water. She's hardly getting any takers. Nobody is coming, she said. They like it when the water level is high. But this isn't the only issue that the canal has been facing. Donald Trump's declarations. It was clear sailing, without a hitch, accident, or unpropitious incident of any kind. On August 15, 1914, the cargo ship SS Ancon made the first official transit of the Panama Canal, completing the passage from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. U.S. diplomat John Barrett was there to record the historic moment, and he marveled at how the path-breaking voyage already seemed routine. So quietly did she pursue her way that a strange observer coming suddenly upon the scene would have thought that the canal had always been in operation. After the Ancon, the voyage did become routine. By the mid-1920s, annual traffic on the canal surpassed 5,000 ships. Today, more than 12,000 ships per year make the voyage across the isthmus. The quicker, cheaper, and safer way to bridge the oceans has transformed global trade and the Western Hemisphere. Today, however, an observer coming upon the scene might sense dark clouds on the horizon. In his inaugural address, U.S. President Donald Trump said that the canal had foolishly been given to the country of Panama. Panama is treating the United States unfairly, and China is operating the canal, he argued, without providing specifics.
The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China.
We're taking it back, he declared. The bridge, it seems, has become an impasse. Difficult waters require steady guides. Below, Atlantic Council experts deftly steer us through how the canal came about, why it matters today, and what to expect next. Throughout the 20th century, the United States, with increasing Panamanian animosity, controlled the canal zone. Increased tensions, perpetuated by the stark difference between U.S.-controlled canal zone life and that outside the zone, led to demonstrations in 1964 that turned violent and resulted in the deaths of both Panamanians and U.S. Marines. This incident sparked new interest across administrations to resolve tensions around the canal, which came to the fore during the presidency of Jimmy Carter, who entered office seeking a new beginning with Latin America. In 1977, Carter came to an agreement with Panama on a transition for the canal, joint administration until 1999, at which point Panama would fully take over the canal. Among other things, the Permanent Neutrality Treaty requires efficient canal operation, transit fees that are just, reasonable, equitable, and consistent with international law, and neutrality of the canal. The Panama Canal Authority, an autonomous entity, was set up to administer, operate, modernize, and set fees for the canal. Since taking over canal operations, Panama has invested more than $5 billion to expand the canal in order to accommodate larger ships. The Panama Canal is among the most significant waterways for global trade, servicing 5% of the total volume of maritime trade globally. For the United States, the canal is critical for efficient trade. 40% of U.S. container traffic passes through the canal annually, carrying about $270 billion in cargo. The Panama Canal is, during standard operating times, the fastest route for trade between the U.S. East Coast and Asia, for example, from New York to Shanghai. Trade from Europe to the U.S. West Coast, or South and Central America to Asia, i.e. Brazil to China, also relies on the canal. Still, over 74% of the trade volume that flows through the Panama Canal is headed for, or coming from, the United States. When El Niño exacerbated drought conditions in 2023 to 2024, causing low water levels in the canal's largest reservoir, Gatun Lake, the disruption proved the economic value of the canal's smooth operation. Lower water levels decrease not only the number of vessels able to transit, but also the volume of cargo they can carry. Canal shipping is not immune to the laws of supply and demand. The fewer vessels able to transit the canal, the higher the price. Furthermore, the Panama Canal authorities levy a freshwater surcharge, which increases when water levels are low, to incentivize water conservation and decrease traffic. The more ships that don't divert or make reservations during drought, the greater the wait time, which reached a peak of 21 days in the summer of 2023. Increased costs, shipping times during the recent drought, likewise increased the shipping costs as much as 14% year over year for dry bulk goods, 12% for vehicle carriers, and 5% and 3% for liquefied petroleum gas and liquefied natural gas, respectively. The Panama Canal plays a significant role in facilitating energy trade between the Americas and Asia. Shipments of U.S. and Brazilian, as well as Canadian barrels re-exported from the United States. Cargoes of crude oil, refined products, and liquefied natural gas destined for Asia often transit the Panama Canal. The canal is particularly crucial for LNG, since virtually all operating U.S. LNG capacity is on the U.S. East and Gulf coasts. Finally, liquefied petroleum gas, an unheralded but vital input for petrochemicals, heating fuel, and engine fuel, is highly dependent on the Panama Canal. The U.S. Gulf Coast accounts for about 40% of all seaborne LPG shipments. Most of those volumes are directed to Asia. However, increasing strains on the canal's capacity to handle transit have, over time, reduced its use as a transit point for energy in favor of other routes. Average Asian volumes of imported crude clean products, fuel oils, and LNG decreased by 6% in 2024, as compared with the average volume between 2021 and 2023. Though Asia has historically sourced these energy cargoes from a number of sources, particularly the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific, decreasing reliability of the canal has significant consequences for the United States' ambitions to use energy as a fulcrum of foreign policy partnerships in the region. For example, average monthly volumes of LNG bound for China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan from the United States via the Panama Canal decreased by 82% compared to the average transit between 2021 and 2023. Whereas average monthly volumes transited via South Africa's Cape of Good Hope increased by 472%. As a consequence, U.S. cargoes to Asia are more costly and have a higher emissions footprint. In the absence of a plan to address either the canal's capacity issues or clear-cut alternatives for westbound cargoes, the Trump administration's ability to use energy trade as a tool in its foreign policy with Asia will continue to be limited. The challenge could even deepen as drought and water availability further constrain passage. With this in mind, it's clear why the canal's limitations have been elevated from a persistent theme in energy markets to a headline issue for the White House. Trump's concerns about the Panama Canal treaties didn't materialize in just the last few weeks. In 2003, when the then Trump-owned Miss Universe contest was held in Panama City, he first got to know the country. Even at that time, Trump expressed the view that the United States got ripped off by the treaties. Interactions with Panama came to a head in 2018, when a legal dispute arose between the Trump Organization and a Miami-based hotel investor who was trying to break off ties with the Trump business. The situation escalated into a standoff with Panamanian authorities. Eventually, Trump's name was taken off the hotel in Panama City at the center of the dispute. Trump's claims that U.S. ships using the canal are being overcharged and unfairly treated in violation of the Torrijos-Carter Treaty are not supported by evidence. The Panama Canal Authority, which manages the canal, charges fees based on the size and type of the ships that are using the waterway.
If you're insured by any of these companies, you are being taken advantage of. My sister works at the DMV, and she sent me this confidential website. If you're paying a lot of money for car insurance, stop right now and go to this website. I put a link to the website below this video. You could pay almost a quarter of what you're paying right now. I only pay $38 for my Ford. Other major companies were trying to charge me over $220 a month. This website gets removed all the time because those big companies don't want you to know about it. But I put the link to the up and running website below where I got my deal. Check it out now before it gets taken down.
Recently, natural factors like decreased water levels have started to affect the canal's ability to support ships. As a result, In a normal supply and demand way, the pricing structure of the canal has also shifted. The rates are uniform, impartial, and non-discriminatory, and they apply to all ships regardless of their nationality. What affects the pricing are factors like ship dimensions and design, the type of cargo it carries, and additional loading or unloading that would take place at the ports. The PCA offers a public maritime services calculator, accessible to anyone. As a side note, the Torrijos-Carter Treaty did include specific and explicit provisions granting preferential treatment to vessels from northern and southern neighbors Costa Rica and Colombia, respectively. But the provisions apply primarily to warships and auxiliary vessels, which are entitled to the same favorable treatment as Panamanian vessels when transiting the canal. This provision, however, is mostly symbolic and in no way impacts commercial shipping. Latin America is seeking options for infrastructure investment, including port infrastructure, and Chinese companies are leaning into those opportunities across the region, just as they are everywhere else. Beijing is not operating the Panama Canal, as Trump claimed.
And Panama's promise to us has been broken. The purpose of our deal?
There are 5 ports adjacent to the canal. Hong Kong-listed Hutchinson Whampoa operates 2 of them, one on the Caribbean side and another on the Pacific side. U.S., Singaporean, and Taiwanese companies operate the other 3. Hutchinson Whampoa has operated its 2 ports since 1997, when the U.S. was still jointly managing the canal. China Harbor Engineering Company launched the cruise terminal in 2024. China Harbor is also building a new bridge over the canal. That project is still underway. There are multiple concerns when Chinese companies acquire strategic port assets. Beijing could conceivably use Chinese-held ports to position military